Good evening, everyone. I welcome to the Executive MBA alumni event on modern monetary theory. It's a demystification. I'm Farokh Langdana. We have about 20, 25 people who are going to be guests. And we have people from Singapore, of course, people from Beijing, people from Shanghai, and people from New Jersey. So it's looking at all your names, it's like a kaleidoscope, you know. I could actually put my cursor on each name and there would be a story there for me, for you. So it's great seeing you all again. Before I go any further, Wendy, thank you so much for all your help in making this happen. Laura, thank you for all the technical assistance, not just today, but last week. I just finished a 2-week course online in Singapore, and this technically would have been the alumni event that we normally do in Singapore. But since it's online, one of the few blessings of COVID, is now we can invite Beijing and Shanghai and everyone else too. So thank you, Lisa, for all your help in New Jersey. Lisa, like me, is up here early in the morning on a gray, rainy, misty day. So thank you so much for all your help, Lisa.
Max is also on the line. Lisa and Max.
So thank you. And also, before I go any further, there are two professors here who I'd like to shout out. One is Hap Paterniti, your strategy professor, who will be there in Singapore 2 courses into the future. So Hap, thank you for being here this early in the morning. And another one, and I saw him signed up, is Jesse Cohn, who taught the Shanghai class some years ago, and I think the Beijing class too, on technical analysis. So Jesse, thank you for being here. If you're in Colorado, then oh my gosh, it's even earlier in the morning. And we have an alum, Prachi Joglekar, from the class of 2017. She was my TA many years ago, so many of those diagrams in the textbook are thanks to her. So Prachi, thank you for being here. This is going to be another intense session, a la Langdana, and it's a crazy time, and we're going to go right into it. I'm going to make this general. I'm going to start from scratch because some of you, of course, know this stuff inside and out. Those from last week, I hope you do. In fact, I know you do. Some have talked to a few years ago, and some of you have worked with many years ago, like in my first class in Beijing, by the way. So I'm going to start from scratch. We also have people who are just visiting us for the first time. So for those of you, I'm Farokh Langdana. I'm a professor in the Finance and Economics department at Rutgers Business School, and I'm the director of the New Jersey program, and I'm the academic director of the Singapore program, and in the past, Beijing and Shanghai programs too. So welcome on board. Do try and come to an open house. The next one is going to be particularly amazing. There's a professor called Ben Soprancetti, and all of you are smiling, all those who had him. He's amazing. He does financial strategy. So do attend that one. The one after that is strategy, corporate strategy with Hap Paterniti, who was CEO of Sodexo. That's going to be another amazing open house. So do come to the open houses, meet the students online, of course. Actually, you can meet them in class because the students on the weekends are actually in class with their masks on. Anyway, so let's do this, folks. I'm going to start from scratch. And regarding questions, if it's a question that pertains to where I am and you kind of lost you or you didn't follow or got cut off or whatever, stop me. Raise your hand, type a chat, and Wendy, if you see it and I don't, interrupt me. It's not a problem at all. I expect it. Otherwise, let's save the questions till the end. If the questions that can wait, that is. So maybe the last 20 minutes or whatever, we'll have questions. We'll end at 8:30. Okay, so modern monetary theory. This is our world right now. And some of you who had me in the past are holding their heads going, how is this happening? And some of you who are a little older like me are wondering, is this like a macroeconomic Twilight Zone episode? where we're all going to wake up and go, oh my God, what was that? What were those deficit GDP numbers? What the heck was that? That was some nightmare. Afraid no nightmare, it's real. And so let's talk about it. I'm going to start from scratch, and I'm going to share the screen, and here we go. All right, so let's start from baseline here. And please indulge me, folks. Some of you know this stuff inside out. I know that because you're still sending me articles, and you were in class last week, some of you. So others, here we go. The Keynesian model. So here comes this economist Keynes. He lights up in the Great Depression. That's when our story begins, 1930s. And he comes up with the Keynesian model, appropriately named after him, which looks like this. This is our old friend. Here we go. And let's make it in the thinner line. And so here we are. This should look familiar to you. That's the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. Here is the aggregate demand curve. Those of you joining us for the first time, that's the demand for everything in the economy. This is a photograph of the economy. Aggregate demand is everything: tanks, guns, planes, software, tourism. Y is GDP and is correlated to jobs, national output, that's Y. And that's a percentage rate. Please understand, all the axes in macro are percentages, okay? So P is the inflation rate. And I do miss my whiteboard and my markers in case you can't tell. So here we are. Keynes came in and said, okay, if this is the situation and we have Y low, it's a low GDP economy. Economy is dead in the water, like in the Great Depression. Lots of people unemployed, 1 in 4, 25%. It was minus 30% GDP. And you know what? Today's numbers are beginning to look like that. Having said that, it's not the same. So I'm going to take you there. And in case I forget to tell you, my blog page has everything that I'm saying today, plus some more. It's just that the detail, the diagrams may not be there. So do go to my blog page. It's very easy to find the Langdana blog page. Just do Langdana blog page on Google. It'll take you to my web page, and then click on it and scroll down. Langdana blog page, the easiest way to find me. And there's a great blog, obviously I'm biased, showing up roughly once every 6 weeks. The one on modern monetary theory is exhaustive. It's got everything in it. Anyway, so Keynes, 1930s, here we are, P0, some inflation rate. And Keynes comes along and says, this is what the world looks like. And he says, let's try and move this curve out to the right. So, don't know why it's going to the thick line today. There we go. So let's move this curve out to the right. And this will take the economy to Y higher and more jobs. And it seems like the commonsensical thing. And it'll give us some inflation, P1. So in this world, when output goes up, inflation goes up too. It's called pro-cyclical. This is a pro-cyclical policy. So you move it from black to blue, and you do it by increasing government spending. And please note, this is good government spending, and this, of course, is subjective, but when this was proposed, G was good G. Today's unemployment benefits, welfare payments, unemployment insurance, those are controversial. So when this was first proposed by Keynes, G was roads, highways, dams, power plants. Today it would be the grid, education for the US, roads, highways, dams, power plant, definitely bridges, high-speed trains, China, India, infrastructure, education. So good G. Another one was increasing M, the money supply. Here we go, folks. So this is setting the stage, increasing the money supply. So the central bank would increase money supply, which would cause interest rates to fall. Okay, so that's interest rates. Let's kind of clear that up a bit. So blue, interest rates to fall. When interest rates, these are short-term rates, fall, capital investment would go up. Capital investment is you and I buying houses, buying vacation homes. Your company is borrowing money because now it's cheaper. So your company is borrowing money to do plant and equipment. So capital I in macro this is capital investment. Okay, it's not stocks and bonds. Don't confuse it. It's housing, Marina Bay Sands, building the fourth tower there, Bristol Myers Squibb, building a lab. So borrowing money to build. And so that would cause the aggregate demand to move to the right. And curve moving to the right is an increase. Curve moving to the left is a decrease, as we all know. And so this was known as jump starting. You can jump start by increasing G, spending money on roads, bridges, highways, good G, increasing M, printing more money, so to speak, lowering interest rates, pushing capital investment up, more construction, more factories. For Singapore there, the channel is to weaken the Singapore dollar. So it's the same channel, okay? It's the same button, but the metric for Singapore is different. The focus is on the Singapore dollar because it's exclusively really an export-based economy. So they want a stable dollar platform. It's the only mature economy that does exchange rate targeting that way. But it's the same mechanism. The more money you print, the more pieces of Singapore paper in the economy, the less they're worth relative to other currencies. Or another way to see it, the more money you print, the price of borrowing money goes down as interest rates in your country dip compared to interest rates overseas. Investors take their money overseas, so they dump Singapore and buy overseas. Singapore dollar weakens. And Singapore dollar weakens, exports go up, and again, aggregate demand moves to the right. So it's the same button, but it's a different transmission mechanism. And the third one was cut in taxes. So this is how you would jumpstart an economy. And when Keynes proposed this, it was a shock. You're looking at this going, Langdana, when you showed this to us in class the first time, my first instinct was move the darn curve to the right. Well, yes, but when Keynes proposed it, there was no role for government. There was no role for the central bank in creating jobs. It was a laissez-faire, a classical world. The aggregate supply was vertical, but there was no role. The role for M and G tax rates conspicuously missing. So here comes Keynes who says, get involved, increase G, incur a deficit. Here we go. Incur a sustainable deficit. And I'm going to explain all this. So I'm going to take you to the root, the fundamental bedrock. I'm going to scroll up here. So before we go any further, how do we pay for this? All last week, setting would be on the fine point. Today it's misbehaving. So how do you pay for this? So how to finance G? This government spending. Well, this increase in government spending. There are three methods. The first one is borrowing. And this is where we are going to be right now. Borrowing is the responsible way to finance a budget deficit. Keep in mind, countries that finance government spending, finance G, are usually safe haven countries. This is a safe haven story. So a country that's secure, stable, not too many revolutions and coups, that sort of thing. So borrowing is the way you finance it. You issue bonds, safe government debt. And it's all relative, of course, safe government debt, or it's called sovereign debt, The other two methods are strongly not advised. And I'm going to be revisiting this soon. Monetization. You do not print money to finance a deficit. And some of you are going, really, Langdana? Have you looked outside the window? Does 2010 mean anything to you? So, yeah, I'm taking you there. We're still talking about Keynes. All right. So this is not a good thing, printing money, called monetization, because what happens here is no one lends you, you print money, you get a hyperinflation. And I'm going to take you there in just a minute. And the third one is default. Basically, you just walk away from your deficit. Not a good plan. This is Fidel Castro, option 3. To all the countries that have lent us money, forget about it. That was his deficit balancing scheme. It's kind of hard to borrow again. So we're not going to monetize right now. These 2 and 3 are bad things. But let's stick with borrowing. So let me ask you the next question. How long can we keep borrowing? So here we go. So how long, let's go here. How long can we keep borrowing? And typically what's done is, if this is the deficit, G minus T, so this is government spending minus taxes. If that's equal to, say, 5, government spending larger than tax revenues, let's say that's 5 billion, whichever unit of currency you like. If you divide this by the GDP, which is Y, let's say that's 100. Excuse me. If it's less than 5%, this is called the deficit GDP ratio. And I think I saw some questions. Interrupt me if you need me to go over anything, all right? I've cleared out the screen here, so I can't see your chats right now. So deficit GDP ratio, if it's under 5%, so this was your budget deficit, which is an annual number, that's your GDP. As long as this number is under 5%, it's a sustainable. It was known as a sustainable bond-financed budget deficit, which means that I borrow from you. Oz, your name just popped up, so borrow from Oz in year 1. Sorry, Oz, you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, good seeing you, man. So if you borrow from Oz in year 1, time to pay him back in year 2, you borrow from that lady there. Time to pay her back in year 2, you borrow from that gentleman there. That gentleman represents a large Japanese pension fund. You pay him back, borrow from that lady the next year. She represents a large Chinese investment bank. And on and on and on. So back in the day, under 5%, you could do this till the end of the world. Sustainable. And by the back in the day, I mean till 2007, because the world changed then. When it was greater than 5%, the deficit GDP ratio, that's non-sustainable. Before I go any further, there is always some confusion. I've got 2 pens here and they're both stuck. Okay, here we go. Non-sustainable. So there's always some confusion between deficits and debt. Okay? The G minus T is the deficit. That's an annual number. And that's the ratio we are talking about. And those are the scary numbers today, which I'll take you to in just a second. So that's the annual number. Debt is all the bonds sold from today going back to the beginning of time. It's cumulative bond sales. So all the borrowings, so today's bonds, yesterday's bonds, day before yesterday's bonds, all those bonds going back in time. It's a cumulative number. Deficit is G minus T for 1 year. Debt is all the bonds outstanding. And those numbers are weird, like 100% of GDP, 120%. Okay, so don't confuse the two. All right. Deficit GDP ratio greater than 5%, non-sustainable, which meant that back in the day, which is still 2007, the rest of the world would stop lending to this country. If it's in the Reagan era, we were 6.4%. All the red lights came on. In plain English, the language is, what the heck are those Americans doing out there? 6.4? Forget it. I'm not recycling the money back. We got all these dollars from them by selling them stuff. We have a trade deficit with them. We got all their green pieces of paper. Normally we lend it back to them, recycle it back. But you know what? Over 5%, forget about it. I'm going to sit on it, or I'm going to park it here, or whatever. I'm not going to recycle it back in bonds. I'm not lending it back to them. I'll never get it back. Because what happens is when it's non-sustainable, there's a presumption that monetization would take place. Because you would kind of have to, right? You have to kind of pay the deficit. You got to, government spending is larger than taxes. You owe people money. The Army, Navy, Air Force, construction, road building. So you monetize, and usually this is hyperinflationary.
I wrote one question from Casey. Why isn't taxation a way to finance government spending?
Thank you, Casey. So please understand, I'm glad you asked me that, Casey. So taxes have already been implemented. So this is now after taxes, you're left with this deficit for this business, for this year. You can raise taxes for the following year. You see what I'm saying? So this is after tax. Taxes have been raised. Now end of the year has come and you're stuck with this deficit. How do you finance it? Next year you can raise it, but the taxes is already done. This is after the taxes. Okay? Okay. Thank you, Wendy. So the big fear is monetization, which leads to hyperinflation. Now listen very carefully, folks, before we go any further. This hyperinflation is crippling. Those of us who were unfortunate enough to live through one will never forget it. Those of us, Singapore has quite a few from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has lost now maybe 30–40% of its population. All the high school, anybody in Zimbabwe who looks like you guys in terms of education has long gone. Venezuela, another meltdown, and on and on. And Professor Humberto Paterniti told me amazing stories about his brother, the doctor, leaving his business and moving to Seville. I remember all your stories, by the way. So immense trauma. Let me give you some numbers here. The Hungarian hyperinflation, because of deficits became non-sustainable. In the last month, 24 times 10 raised to 28. Just in the last month, there was the increase in the price level. Money becomes worthless. It's years into not just the generation that suffered, but future generations. So here we are. I consider the most important hyperinflation, not the largest one. The largest, I think, is Zimbabwe. But the most important one would be the German hyperinflation after World War I. And can you see the note, folks? All right. So that's the German. It's 10 million marks after World War I. This was used to wallpaper apartments. And this was used to light fires. It was worthless. The back could not be printed. They couldn't afford to print the back. So German hyperinflation money. And then we have, here is some more German hyperinflation money. Towns started issuing their own money. That's the town of Deggendorf. Money was worth only 2 weeks. It's kind of like a Disney pass, but this is money issued by a town. And here's the back, beautiful. This is Deggendorf at the height of the German hyperinflation. And just real quick, one of your Singapore executive MBAs, Kim. Kim, if you're there, thank you. Built this for me. These are all the Zimbabwe currencies. and I'm just going to, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but every single Zimbabwe hyperinflation. Let me show you the last one, which is 100 trillion. Above that is 50 trillion. And above that is 20 trillion. 100 trillion. It's anybody who can get out is out. The exchange rate last night was one Zimbabwe dollar, new dollar, with this new currency was introduced, is equal to 0.2 cents, not even a cent, 0.2 cents. So wiped out. A whole generation's savings, and in Zimbabwe's case, several generations gone. So it's trauma. You don't ever want to go there. And I say the German hyperinflation is the most important because that really made the German central bank, the Bundesbank, inflation phobic. And that's why, till recently, the European Central Bank was a bulwark against inflation. Those guys were paranoid. They would not increase M. M, mayo, no M. They would not increase M because in their mind's eye, anything more than 2% inflation, they'd be sleepwalkers. They'd start drinking. They'd be terrified. And rightly so. Now listen very carefully, please. The hyperinflation and those notes I showed you, and Kim, thank you for that amazing folder. The notes I showed you, the hyperinflation happens only when the money is spent. Some of you who did macroeconomics some years ago will remember a term called velocity. I don't really use that in class, but I probably should. To us, it was C bar, I bar, consumer confidence, investor confidence. Velocity means the number of times a currency changes hands, how many transactions there are basically. And so when confidence is low, when the money doesn't change hands, it just sits there. When that happens, there is no hyperinflation. Okay, so hyperinflation happens, I'll repeat this several times, when the money that's printed immediately goes whoosh into the economy. It's already spent. You print the money in Ukraine, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. You're paying the teachers who haven't been paid for 6 months. So money's already gone. You're paying the army, the Air Force. You're paying for medical equipment that you bought. You're paying for road construction. Those guys haven't been paid in 2 years. And on and on. So the money is gone in circulation, and it, like in the German hyperinflation, doubles every half an hour or less. When it does not go into circulation, that baby sits there and there is no hyperinflation. So let's now move to 2010. And any questions, folks, that pertain to what I've done? Anything? Should I quickly look at the chats? I'm trying to keep my screen clear. Wendy, let me know if some of the chats need attention, okay, please? So let's fast forward. Here I am in Shanghai. You know, you guys are there, right near Xintiandi. It was an evening class, and I've told you the story. Class was from 7 to 10, I think. So there I was trying to get some dinner before class, and I get this message from my spies. Yeah, Ravi, go ahead, ask the question, please. Unmute yourself and ask. Yes. Bertrand, yes, please go ahead and ask the question. Unmute yourselves. No. Okay, here we go. What is meant by monetization? Monetization is simply printing money, okay? So if the deficit is 240 billion, all right, G minus T is 240 billion, and you can only borrow 200 billion, you print 40 billion. How does monetization occur? What happens is I am the treasury, I'm the government, okay? And I want to borrow, say, 100 billion. So I issue these are new government bonds. So who's going to lend me money? I'm going to pay you $100 next year. who's going to lend me? And you say 60, 65, 70, 75. These are discount bonds. 80, anyone? 80, okay, good. So I borrow 80 from this person and I give this person 100 next year. What happens is, what if I can't borrow enough? The deficit is too big. So what happens is I take this new government bond and call my central bank, Federal Reserve, People's Bank of China, choose your central bank, Reserve Bank of India, and say, hey, guess what? I needed to borrow 240 billion. We only could borrow 200 billion. So I'm sending 40 billion over to you. Give me the cash. That's monetization in plain English, where the central bank buys the new bonds. What if countries are rich in resources, gold, but don't have the proper infrastructure for mining? Yeah. And so often when hyperinflation happens, countries basically try and sell off their assets frantically. And gold or state-owned enterprises, or in Russia's case, when Russia was melting down, when the whole Soviet Union came apart, there was a sense that they were going to start selling nukes. And the rest of the world was like, help these guys now, before the nukes get on the market. So, good questions. Thank you. I hope that helps you. Okay. Periodically, I will look at the chats. All right, folks? Okay, there's one more here. Okay, good. So, here we are. So I've defined hyperinflation. Thank you for those questions. So those institutional questions about how it's exactly done. So 2010, I get the message that the US budget deficit was 12. The deficit GDP ratio, the height of the subprime crisis was around 12%. Remember, the highest was 6.4%. And I remember thinking, no, this was my SPY. Like I said, I'm like a macroeconomic doctor, no. With spies and central banks, and you're thinking Langdana needs to get a life. You're probably right. So, a 12, I said, no. You sure? You're not confusing this with debt and all that? He said, no, man, it's 12%. You're going to hear this on Tuesday. And I went, oh my God. 12? 5% was the benchmark. 6.4 in Reagan era, we kind of freaked and we brought G minus T down. We got religion, deficit religion, we brought it down. 12. And I remember, and everyone's rolling their eyes, they've heard the story before. I said, why even have class tonight? It's over. And there was this taxi stand, where it is in Shintyandi. I said, let me walk out in front of the taxis and end this. What's the point? Well, fast forward, of course I didn't, since I'm here. And of course we had class since those guys graduated, sitting there and smiling at me. I can feel that. And so the sky did not fall on our heads. There was no hyperinflation. Let me just go one step at a time. Deficit GDP ratio 12%, massive monetization. So we started selling bonds to the central bank, since you asked me the question. They're basically cranking out money. We also bought all the rotten mortgage-backed assets, which in class I call bags of oranges. So in the subprime crisis, hedge funds, banks, lenders, real estate agents, mortgage companies, pension fund managers, they had all basically bought these bundles of collateralized mortgage obligations. So what we did in the subprime crisis, we lent money to anyone and everyone. And many of you have heard this story from me. And most of the people, some of the people, should not have been given any money. We shouldn't have made loans to them. There were things like liar loans, no documentation loans. People were making up their salaries. We kind of threw away all the safeguards. And there was a gentleman in my class in New Jersey who owned a mortgage company who was lending out $1 million a day at the peak. And he said, Farooq, I know these guys can't pay me back. I said, so what do you do? He said, in 2 days I sell it. It's like musical chairs. I just pass it on. And when the music stopped, the guys left with all that rotten mortgages. He used another expression. They are going to lose their shirts. And I went, wow, how do you sleep at night? He said, I just move it. No problem. I'm not breaking a single law. And they weren't. The doors were left open. So when the music stopped, I'm just fast forwarding here. When the music stopped, when the interest rates went up, basically all those guys who could barely make those mortgages now could make them less because rates went up quickly. Then the adjustable mortgages in America, unlike Canada and other countries. So those rates went up, boop, 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 and now they just fell off the trees. Those investment properties which they were going to flip, they couldn't hang on to them. And so those rotten billions, trillions of rotten mortgages were sitting there. And what happened is we bailed them out. Ben Bernanke, the United States Federal Reserve, bailed them out. And frankly, I was in my own world. I was working on another edition of that book you guys have. I think maybe the last one or the one before that, I can't remember. And in my office walks in the owner of the 8th largest hedge fund in the world. He only had 16 clients. That gives you an idea how big they were. He was on our board of advisors. Jess, you probably have run into him in your finance world here. He was sitting in my office laughing his head off. He said, Professor, I was fully expecting to lose my shirt and go bankrupt. And good old Ben Bernanke bought all those rotten mortgages which I was stuck with, bought them off me. Professor, what a great country. He was laughing his head off. And that's when I woke up and said, oh my gosh, these guys are laughing all the way to the bank. And so let me show you quantitative easing. And please understand, when I come to modern monetary theory, I'm actually there. Modern monetary theory is tying a lot of these things I'm saying into this banner of MMT. So I'm giving you all the discrete parts, and then I'm going to lump them all together. This is one of the crucial discrete parts of MMT. Okay, so quantitative easing, QE, quantitative easing. And Wendy, if the questions are adding up, just let me know and I'll do another chat. I'll look at the chats in just a second, please. So here we are. Here is the money market. Green pieces of paper or orange or whatever you like. Here is money. And here are interest rates. These are short-term, very short-term interest rates. Here is money demand for cash. And here is money supply. Let's use color, it stands out. Money supply. This is controlled by the central bank. So here, controlled by the central bank. So they want to increase money or print money. They move to the right and increases to the right, okay? And so let's call this, different color. This is 0% here. Okay, that's 0% here. So here we go. Federal Reserve basically bailed out all these bad boys and girls by buying all the rotten mortgages and increasing the money supply. Increasing the money supply. The captain, here we are, 48 billion a month. Go all the way down. Here is money demand. This is 0%. And right in here, this. So right in here, so interest rates can't fall below 0. This is 0%. So we are stuck at 0. And all this liquidity is called quantitative easing. So we printed money, 48 billion a month for about 7 years. Towards the last few years, 24 billion a month. Bought the rotten oranges, as I call them, because we put the good mortgages and bad mortgages in these bags. They're like bags of oranges you buy in grocery stores, where they have good oranges and bad oranges. So I used to call them bags of oranges. So bought them. These guys are laughing their heads off. And here we are, this huge amount of liquidity, trillions, maybe 35 trillion. The Fed says it's like 28 trillion. Other estimates put this as 35 trillion. We're still out there, that liquidity. And many of us were lying awake going, oh my gosh, this is more money printed than all the money printed going from now to the last ice age. Oh my, the sky's gonna fall on our heads. It was a travesty, it really was. If you get a chance, look up Confessions of a Quantitative Easer. Write it down, it's a free Google, it's a Wall Street Journal, but you can access it. Confessions of a Quantitative Easer. And anybody who's done my class has studied it. It's one of the 4 guys who ran this operation. And he apologizes to America. He's a Rutgers professor, a Rutgers finance PhD, by the way. And he says, sorry, America, I let you down. And I'm more or less quoting him. I bailed out Wall Street and I sacrificed Main Street. I'm sorry. And he points out that the best year Wall Street ever had, was, I think it was 2010 or 2011, the peak of the subprime crisis. Because they got money at 0% here, and they lent it at 6%. Second best year was the next year. Quantitative easing, and this is going on now. The Feds are buying junk bonds. People are wondering, Ben and I were having this conversation, will the Fed buy comic book collections? If so, I got a great one right here. People's spoon collections, what will they buy next? And so one of my groups, my student groups in last week in Singapore did a great presentation. They looked at quantitative easing today in Southeast Asian countries. It's happening in Southeast Asian countries, but since they can't have a runaway deficit, since they don't have a global currency, they're doing QE, but still keeping an eye on the deficit GDP ratio, which is very interesting. So all quantitative easings are not alike, please note. This is the mother of all quantitative easings right here that happened then and is happening now. So here we go. We got massive deficits, deficit GDP ratio around 12%. Sorry, folks. Clear this out. Then you got amazing, then you got huge, unbelievable increase in money supply, unbelievable. And by the way, a large part of this and today's quantitative easing is fueling the rise in the stock market. You have layoffs coming, you have massive layoffs coming, and I'm seeing them running an executive MBA program. I have students who are running HR from Fortune 50 countries, by the way. And they're telling me, Farooq, 12,000 are being shed, 9,700, shutting down operations in 4 locations. And yet the market goes up. There's liquidity that has to flow somewhere. The money that's being printed is like water. If it's not going in housing, it's going into gold. And one of the Singapore students, I'm not going to mention the name because this is a personal thing, I'm sure, had his son investing in gold, going to Mustafa and buying a little biscuit. That kid is a millionaire soon at this rate. So, but anyway, going into gold, going into stocks, and there you have it. So just be careful. If you're in the market, just remember, large portion of what you're seeing is liquidity driven. And when it's printing money, it's flowing in. And when it's liquidity driven, it goes up fast and comes down fast. So be alert. Enjoy the ride, be alert. You're younger than I am, so you can handle some shocks, I feel certain. So here we go, massive scary stuff. Let me see the questions before I move forward. So when the Fed buys government bills and treasuries, yes, that's monetization, but there are different degrees of monetization. So we are talking about rampant monetization. So when the Fed buys old bonds, that's open market operations, that's M. Debt deflation, well, that's coming. Why does the government refuse to believe the money could go to individuals who could then use it for what they need? It's, Casey, you know what? I wish they would listen to you and me, because Casey, we don't have huge donations. His question is, instead of going to corporate bailouts and over, Casey, you and I are small fry. Well, Langdana is small fry. You may not be. So we aren't going to be major players in the next election, my friend. Sadly. Sadly. If you're not, let me not step on toes. Welcome to the sordid world of macro policy and macro politics. It's a sordid world out there. It's a sordid world out there. Okay. So, no, there was no inflation. And in macroeconomics, pi is inflation. Nothing happened. The sky didn't fall on our heads. It was just here we are, all of the economists brought up in the old school who said, oh my gosh, the long end of the yield curve is going to be signaling inflation. The sky is going to fall on our heads. Nothing happened. Over 12% deficits, more money printed than since the last glaciation, the Wisconsin ice sheet. Since then, nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then we realized that that money, this one here, was sitting there. I call it toothpaste money, by the way. Toothpaste, you can easily get it out, but it's hard to put back in. How will this money be sucked in? Will the Fed go to that gentleman there in the light blue shirt? I'm making it up. There's got to be a gentleman in a light blue shirt. That gentleman in light blue shirt and say, hey, you know, you sold me these rotten oranges. Well, I want to suck this money back in because it's dangerous, because once confidence goes up, if people actually borrow this money and spend it and build houses and factories and whatnot, we're going to see inflation going through the ceiling here. So it's sitting there now because confidence is low. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Confidence is low, velocity is low, money's sitting there, so it's dangerous. I want to suck it back in. You can't. It's toothpaste money. You can't put the toothpaste back. What am I going to do? Go to the guy in the light blue shirt and say, hey, buy your oranges back. Now give me the money back. The guy will go, Langdana, you take those oranges and get out of here. Can someone call security, please, and get this weird professor out of here? Toothpaste money. So no inflation. What happened is that money wasn't spent. It was sitting there. The banks were also not lending. They had lost their shirts. People were not borrowing. And here we are, folks. Let me define something that all of you should know: a liquidity trap. Modern monetary theory must have a liquidity trap. So I'm putting all the parts together, and then voila, you will have modern monetary theory. Remember, it's not modern and it's not a theory. It's not modern, it's not a theory. Okay, so here we are. This is the investment function. Let's talk about this. Very important. What I'm showing you here is the necessary condition. It's the motherboard for MMT. Okay, so this is capital investment. This is borrowing by companies for capital investment for new factories, new labs. Marina Bay is building the fourth tower, another infinity pool, whatever. Borrowing for capital investment. This is borrowing. I is the interest rate, which was up here. That baby here on the vertical axis. This guy here. Right, interest rate. So that's controlled by the central bank. central bank. And keep in mind, all the QEs are not the same. All right, but this is the theory. I bar, very important, investor confidence. F is a fixed number. It's an elasticity. For those of you who remember that, it's a sensitivity. Call it 0.5. Forget about it right now. It's fixed. So here we are. If interest rates are pushed down, right? This is how monetary policy works. This is the DNA of monetary policy. Interest rates are pushed down. It's cheaper to borrow money. Capital investment goes up. This is it. This is the motherboard, the DNA of monetary policy. Interest rates go up. Let's clear this. Interest rates go up. Then capital investment goes down because it's too expensive to borrow. And you go, you know what? Rates have gone up. I can't afford this. You know what? Hold off on that fourth tower, Marina Bay Sands. A fourth tower, mayo. Take it next year, maybe. So here we go again. Interest rates go down. Let's do that one. And capital investment should go up as interest rates. So, yeah. Well, can you tell me, can you think about why, let's get this out of there. Sorry. So here we are, this should go up, right? So here, this should go up if interest rates go down. Well, please look at this carefully. The main culprit here is this guy here. If investor confidence is also down, then even if interest rates are down, there'll be no change in capital investment. It'll cancel out. So if interest rates are low, but if investor confidence, I bar, is also low, there'll be no change in in capital investments. And you think about it, interest rates are 0.2. You know, according to this equation, you should rush out and borrow money. No, if investor confidence is low, you're going, why the heck would I borrow money at 0.2% when my project will be ready next year? But there's going to be a trade war raging. There's going to be a non-sustainable deficit. There are going to be riots on the street. There's going to be the guy in North Korea misbehaving. Just choose whichever drama you want, you know, whichever drama you want on this planet. There's plenty of drama on this planet. So that's called a liquidity trap. You have to know this. A liquidity trap is basically when interest rates are low, but investor confidence is also low, which means that precludes capital investment from going up. And keep in mind, folks, this is the main thing. The rest of the world, the 6 o'clock news, the president here, no, forget our president here. 6 o'clock news, there's a one-to-one link. Interest rates are down, well, the economy should pick up. No. And Keynes called this animal spirits. He said if animal spirits are low, there's nothing you can do. You can have interest rate zero. Japan, interest rate zero, practically zero. Nothing happened because investor confidence is the main guy. You know, Milton Friedman, Rutgers' most famous product, and a Nobel laureate, one of 3 now at Rutgers, famously said you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. So you can lower interest rates till the cows come home, but if investor confidence is low, there'll be no change in this baby here. The money will sit there. Liquidity trap. So here we are now. Let's come to the present. Let's go with blue. And what we have, the present. It's an exogenous supply side shock, COVID-19. And what we have is, here is aggregate supply. Here is aggregate demand. This was Y0, so this is January. This is P0. And those of you who remember what we did in class, COVID was a wham, a supply side shock along the lines of an oil shock. along the lines of Katrina, a hurricane, 9/11, COVID shut down the supply chains, shut down a global, the lights went out. We had to turn off our lights basically on production and the economy to fight it. And we got a collapse in confidence. So here we are, collapse in C bar. This is for all of you who remember your macro, consumer confidence and investor confidence. And this is just a quick snapshot of the world right now. P lower, some countries are in deflation, and Y recession. Singapore down 13% negative. Singapore deficit GDP ratio 13%. The numbers are staggering. United States 16% deficit GDP ratio. So G minus T over Y for the US, 16, maybe 17% now. Singapore, it's 13%. All the numbers are over 5, monster numbers. Economies are contracting, so monster numbers. So here we are, supply side shock, and then collapse in aggregate demand. That's your snapshot for COVID. So let's look at our response. Here we have deficit GDP ratios are huge. Government spending went up to bail out the companies, to keep small businesses alive. Huge increase in money supply. Monster quantitative easing, guys. More quantitative easing than we did in 2010. Not China, though. Shenomics. China has held back. So Shenomics is a different kind of Chinese macro policy. Only 5% of China's GDP went into its stimulus. China's stimulus this time was less than half America's. Very tightly controlled. Not throwing money around like they did in 2009 and 10. Okay, so huge amounts of money are being printed, huge amounts of deficit GDP ratio, and here we are, modern monetary theory. Let me just put this all together. Modern monetary theory, you must know it, and people out there don't really mention this. The necessary condition is that there has to be a liquidity trap in existence. Without a liquidity trap, all the money you're going to be printing is going to get sucked into the economy, and you're going to have this nightmare staring you in the face. And people do not recover from this nightmare. This generation would hide money at home, in newspapers, not in banks, in jars and the garden. It changes you. So necessary condition, liquidity trap. It means, in plain English, C bar, consumer confidence, investor confidence, very low. In other words, the money you are printing is not going to go into circulation. But that's the necessary condition. If this baby is gone, we have a problem. The next one, monetary policy has lost its mojo. Monetary policy is doing nothing. And so these guys believe, I'm putting it in quotes, has lost its power or its mojo or its masculinity, if you will, okay? Has been emasculated, okay? Has lost its mojo. Well, we know why. It is a gosh darn liquidity trap. A monetary policy hasn't gained or lost anything. It's I-bar. When I-bar is dead, that baby is not going to work. Keynes told us about it. This is nothing new, but this is a revelation to people like, oh, monetary policy is not working anymore. I'm going, well, yeah, one of the parts of the equation has changed. It's not that monetary policy is ineffective. It's C bar and I bar is gone. So it should not work. It will not work. The only role, here we go, only role for monetary policy, M, is to be a servant to G. So monetary policy has been basically demoted. It's denigrated. So it's a servant to government spending, basically to finance G. To finance G and to finance unrestricted G, because deficits don't matter. Unrestricted budget deficits. I mean, we had 12% in the subprime crisis. Sky didn't fall on our head. Langdana almost threw himself in front of a taxi cab in Chintiandi. That would have been annoying, wouldn't it? And now we have 17%. Singapore has 13%. You go through the list in the Economist magazine. It's like, I feel like I'm going to wake up, but this is a Twilight Zone episode. I'm going to go, damn, that was a weird dream. And deficits don't matter. Nothing happens. You're just printing money. It's sitting there. And so this was MMT, modern monetary theory, was made popular by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the last election, the Democratic nomination, and Bernie Sanders. They actually came up with MMT. They said, we will fund the green jobs. This is how they're going to pay for the green jobs. They're going to fund free college tuition using MMT, because just print money. And there is nothing backing money anymore. There is no gold backing money since 1971, since the Nixon administration. So I don't have time for the gold story today, but in 1971, Nixon did away. The US was supposed to maintain the peg to gold, $35 an ounce. And the rest of the world was supposed to lock fixed exchange rates to the US, which was tied to gold. And this way the US wouldn't print money and behave irresponsibly. Well, the US did in the Vietnam War. The price of gold in the black market went from 35 to 42 to 48. And so Chinese gold merchants in Macau were buying gold at the fixed rate of 35 and selling it at 45 or whatever. And so the French caught on that something was going on. I like to use an Indian phrase. There was some hera fairy. It's a great Indian phrase, hera fairy, which means something weird, untoward. And so the French said, okay, we have all these dollars. We need gold, because at that point you could exchange dollars for gold. And they sent a battleship to New York Harbor to collect their gold. And the Brits figured out on the Thursday that, you know what, we should get gold too, because the Nixon's up to no good. So the Brits said, we want the dollars as gold. And Nixon said, this is going to wipe 80% of our gold reserves off. So that week, 15th of August, 1971, no gold. He just shut it down. And that was the night that the euro was born. Many of my European contacts tell me that was the night the Europeans sat down and said, we gotta have our own currency, guys. This is crazy. But anyway, not back to gold, not precious metals. Global currencies are essentially not back to anything but the reputation, very important, the reputation of the central banks. So green jobs, free college, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Alessandria Ocasio-Cortez, that's when the name came up. There's nothing monetary, there's nothing modern, and it's not a theory. What I like to do is call this circumstantial macro. And by circumstantial macro, circumstantial macro. This is a phrase I've coined. Basically, circumstantial evidence in court is like, okay, that gentleman there in the navy jacket. You know what? The person who broke into the museum last Tuesday was in a navy jacket. You have a navy jacket. So you are the crook. Circumstantial evidence thrown out mercifully in any court of law. So I call this circumstantial macro. We went over 10% deficit GDP ratio. We were at 13% or whatever in the subprime crisis. There was no hyperinflation then. So now that we are very high now, there won't be any hyperinflation now. Circumstantial macro. And the example I gave in Mumbai when I did a lecture like this, and I think it's valid for Singapore and China because you live in those tall buildings like in Mumbai in the apartments, those expensive apartments. So the example I gave was it's a tall building. There's a guy on his balcony who's got this huge barbecue, not those little teeny tiny ones. This is a monster barbecue. And there are flames, and he's barbecuing vegetables. And since the vegetarians, I'll be sensitive. So he's got all kinds of veggies, sprinkling barbecue sauce, the flames. And the woman above is leaning over from a balcony and going, "What are you doing? You're going to burn the building down. I'm going to call the association and the supervisor." He's leaning over with a bucket of water. And the guy goes, "Madam, do not throw the water on my vegetables here, my veggies here. The wind is blowing away. As long as the wind blows away, no fire." She said, how do you know that? Because this is September. And in September, the wind blows that way. The next week, he has a bigger barbecue. Now he's got corn with lemon and chili powder on it, like we do back in India. And now she's got a bigger bucket. She's hanging over, her husband's hanging over from the balcony like, what are you doing? You're going to burn the house down. And the guy goes, "No, the wind was blowing that way last week. It's going to blow that way now. And don't throw the water on my veggies. Please go back in." So, circumstantial macro. And this is how we are paying for our rescue plans. Now, in some cases, the MMT was designed to just keep oil in the engine, just keep the economy from sinking. In some cases, MMT is going to be trying to frantically get inflation up. Remember in the first diagram I showed you, if you can get P up, there's a sense that Y will go up, pro-cyclical. So different countries are using MMT to different degrees. No one's calling it that. Trump is definitely using it. We are buying all kinds of junk corporate debt, unbelievable stuff. Because you can't just give somebody a sack of cash. You have to buy something. So let me take the questions now, but that's MMT. It's a leap of faith, you're holding your breath saying, we have to come up with money. We have to keep this economy alive. We are sinking here. And we just have to keep our fingers crossed that C-bar and I-bar doesn't rise and the money we print just sits there. And given the shock, a supply-side shock like COVID, supply-side shocks are not easy to fix. Sadly, with COVID, we don't know how long it'll be. The other ones, 9/11, Katrina, oil shocks, those were discrete shocks. The drought in India when the monsoon fails, that's a supply-side shock. And they're tough. Inflation goes up and Y goes down. This one, we don't know. There's another third wave coming. So keep the printing presses going. Call it modern monetary theory. It's basically circumstantial macro. The sky didn't fall on our heads in 2010. Hopefully the sky won't fall on our heads now. Let me see what the chat's questions are. John, hi John. Okay, thank you. Casey, money is being deployed to corporations. Yes, and you know what? Yeah, Casey's question is corporations don't know what to invest it in, but people definitely know. Casey, you're preaching to the choir. It's like the tax cuts, we had those massive Trump tax cuts, and I talked about that in Singapore. And if I may point out, I was right. Just as an FYI, that was, I think, at the American Club a couple of years ago. The tax cuts, Trump's tax cuts, went into share buybacks. Reagan's tax cuts actually brought labor participation rates going up. And actually, one of the groups last week did another great. The presentations in class were outstanding last week, by the way. So Reagan's tax cuts brought women into the workforce. The participation rate went up. The economy burgeoned because C-bar and I-bar had gone up. Reagan brought C-bar and I-bar up. He was a unifier. He made poor Jimmy Carter. He was a disaster for confidence. He was the most honest president in the world. Guy was a disaster for confidence. There is a malaise that has gripped this country. I'm going, oh my gosh, let me walk out into traffic again. Reagan pulled it off. C-bar up. Reagan wanted to tear down the walls, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down the walls. The guy we have now wants to build walls. He rules by fear. He's addicted to low C-bar. He thrives in a low C-bar climate. And so the tax cuts, companies aren't hiring. Why would they hire executives like you? They pocketed the money. They did share buybacks. So again, the assumption is the money. Hey, Hap, before we finish today, please help us understand why with a monster. Yeah, I just finished doing that. Because in the US, these last few monetizations, Hap, they weren't the same as in the past. In the subprime, we bought junk mortgage-backed assets from the lenders, and we gave it to the lenders, as opposed to in the previous hyperinflations, Argentina, which you're well aware of and familiar with, that money was already spent. Why aren't all countries printing money to the same extent? They can't afford to. The US has what the French call an exorbitant privilege. It's the safest. The US Treasury bill is still the safest asset on the planet in spite of all our problems. And it's the global currency. And it's by far, there's that much dollars, there's that much euro, there's that much UN. So by far, so we can pull it off. I remember my Greeks telling me, like, Farouk, if you were Greece, you would have melted down years ago. We Greeks melt down like that. You guys can have deficits and whatever the heck you really want to do, print money and rest of the world will buy it, take it. So that's the exorbitant privilege. And I'm just afraid guys like me are worried that our policymakers take that for granted, and become complacent and don't really understand what's at stake. So modern monetary theory, to recap, it's really Keynesian economics gone on steroids, monster G, monster M. It must have liquidity trap as a necessary condition. And then you just print the money. It's not back to gold. And you pay $600 to people, give small businesses money. And the Europeans are in this tight fix. The European Central Bank was so inflation phobic. They were so phobic about printing money, again, because of the memory of the German hyperinflation. And then comes the whole Eurozone. And before you know it, the European Central Bank, which was a vertical aggregate supply curve, and some of you remember that, phenomenally tight, almost ridiculously tight monetary policy, disciplined, married into the Eurozone, and they got Mario Draghi. And now we have Christina Lagarde, and they're both heavy Keynesians. They're doing QE, quantitative easing, and quantitative easing in Japan first, then in the US, then in the Europe, and then Eurozone, now back in the Eurozone, back in the US. And the Germans are lying awake at night like, good grief, what's going on here? So we gotta have a German back in the European Central Bank. The die is cast. So I'm just going to see that no questions here. So what we've done, MMT, it's basically a collection of ideas that we knew. It's a dangerous thing, but that's all we have right now. And it's going to be low C-bar for the economy. As long as the C-bar is low, MMT, we can pull it off. And I told my New Jersey class, I did the massive webinar, like 600 people in March, when the platforms weren't even sophisticated. We couldn't even have any cameras or anything then. And I said that this is the time that separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls. You know, in good times, everybody's great. You know, in a bull market, you touch any stock, it goes up. In a bull economy, everybody is great and friendly. It's bear economies, like now, the whole planet is a bear economy, that countries, companies, families, individuals show what they're really made of. You know, the men from the boys, women from the girls are separated then. And what we need to do as products of Rutgers, the 8th oldest school in the country here, and as products of this globally ranked executive MBA program, we need to be leaders and ensure that, at least for us, in the few months to come till this baby goes away, our C bar and I bar always stays high. So thank you for being here with me today after a hard day's work, and we'll do more of these. So you know what I was telling somebody before this session, one of the few benefits, if there's any benefit of COVID, is we can do more sessions like this. You know, we can have you China people and New Jersey people join the Singapore crowd here. So we can do more. We certainly will do more. We have always tried to stay in touch with you folks, and we're going to keep doing that. I just can't wait to get my executive MBAs back to Asia next summer. So questions, comments, fire away, ask questions, chat, whatever, whichever mode you like. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see some of your faces. Yes, any questions, folks? Anything? Hap, did I answer your question? Okay. Any chats? Wendy?
No chats coming in.
Okay.
Some of them, yeah.
Okay. And since I have a few minutes, let me just tell you about supply side economies. In the wait, there are 4 chats down here. So let's see what that is. Mitch Bresnik, Oz. Well, thank you. Thank you. So the comments, thank you. Please understand that in terms of gold, there's a sense that should currencies be linked to gold again, since it was supposed to be an anchor? It's too late for that. There isn't enough gold anymore. So that window literally has closed. There's another sense, what will happen in Europe? The north and west of Europe believe in less government spending. They're not Keynesian economies, so believe in less government spending, less printing of money. The southern part of Europe is Keynesian. Like I showed you that right in the beginning, large government spending and large M makes a difference. So we have 2 models lying in bed together, and that's a recipe for disaster for Europe. For Singapore, the comment I made last week in class was Singapore has a huge asset that China at this point does not have. And Singapore, in addition to making itself an innovation center, Singapore was focused on exports all this time, exports, exports, exports. But now the time has come when it's focusing on innovation, R&D, biotechnology, biosimilars, artificial intelligence, trying to use its high-skilled workforce. But the thing is, what Singapore has, very few countries have. And since we are focusing on Singapore and China here, Singapore is a safe haven. And I mentioned this when I spoke in Singapore last year and the year before too. Singapore started issuing government bonds for the first time, just I think 4 or 5 years ago. Not because it needed money, but because it needed a long-term radar, so to speak. But Singapore has safe haven. And you cannot buy safe haven, you cannot build it, You cannot get it by conquering. You cannot get it by military might. You have it or you don't have it. Singapore has it. China, God bless it, has got its hands full right now. So, but China's got its hands full with Hong Kong and everything. Singapore becomes even more of a safe haven. And so this is when Singapore attracts global headquarters to be a major hub for Asia and a major R&D center and a major education center. So that's Singapore's big advantage. China has done a three-pronged policy. This quick summary. So Xenomics, named after Xi Jinping, has got three prongs. It's very interesting. It's not dramatic. So China essentially is regrouping. So China 1.0 was massive outlays, massive infrastructure. China 2.0 is, okay, let's collect our breath. So Xenomics, the first step, don't go crazy with G&M. Holding it in. They don't want bubbles, again, because large M causes bubbles. So the stimulus this time was less than half of America's stimulus. They've cleaned up their bond market. They've tightened MNG. They're not going crazy with gains. That's step one. Step two, deregulation productivity, cleaning house. It takes only 9 days to start a company in China. You folks who are there, I'm hoping my information is right. You're there, you know a lot more than I do or will ever do. So 9 days to start a company. The number of bankruptcy investigations and copyright and violation investigations have gone up 5-fold since 3 years ago. So there is action happening. It's like the whole aggregate supply curve, the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, is moving to the right. It's an increase in productivity. That's second step of Xenomics. The third step of Xenomics is the private and public sector, their lines are blurred. You know, it's very hard to tell. What you have is, even in private sector, now there are cells who essentially report to the government, and private sector companies can be blacklisted if they deviate from a strategy. So it's a strategy. It's like strategic trade that we discussed in class, and the strategy is to focus on choke points in their supply chains. What's happening now? So China is terrified of choke points. The difference between India and China, if you look at the map of India, it's wide open spaces, water, wide open water. If you look at the map of China, not wide open water. It's straits, little gaps that can be blocked very easily and have been blocked in naval exercises, by the way. And so China paranoid. And remember, I said this in class last week, it all goes back to the Opium Wars and the horrible things that happened to China in the Opium Wars. The DNA of China is, terrified of foreigners, xenophobic, because every kid in Beijing goes to the old summer palace and looks at the ruins of the old summer palace, destroyed by the British and the French and looted, and that's in the DNA. And there is no open water and choke points. So China is working on semiconductors, microprocessors, and batteries. Research in these areas directed by the government. That's happening now. And so you have a centrally planned R&D innovation kind of world. We're not sure if that's going to work, because in the past, historically, massive explosions in innovation have come from societies where the capital can move freely, labor, high-skilled labor can move freely, speak freely, think freely, exchange ideas freely. It's burgeoned. That's the ecosystem for innovation. Nobody quite knows what it is, but it's the common denominator has been this massive amount of freedom and mobility. Let's see what happens with Xenomics. But it's an interesting mix of three things: low MNG, increasing state productivity and deregulation and just tightening up the efficiency of doing business, and strategic trade, strategic directive on R&D, the blending of private and public, and government focusing activity in well-planned sectors. So let's see how that works. And maybe when we have another one of these next year, we'll be able to bring it all together. There are some chats here. Let me see. Thank you, Hap. I answered your question. Thank you very much. Wes, if 17% deficit GDP ratio is okay in the US, what's your prediction on the ratio that breaks the system? Wes, you know something? If you had woken me up at 3 in the morning in March and told me that, Langdana, what do you think of 17% deficit GDP ratio? I would have said, Wes, you need to see a doctor right away. You are not well. Don't talk like that. These things are science fiction, macro science fiction. You know, I mean, the jobless claims, when the US economy is tight, jobless claims are 200,000 a week. That's jobless insurance, first-time jobless insurance. When the US economy was bad and dead in the water, that number would be 475,000 a week. People asking for unemployment insurance for the first time. We had 1 million. When the first time I heard they're going to be, looks like it's going to be 1 million, and I said, no. I am awake. So all the gold and platinum we'll ever need is the asteroids. Hang on there, Mustafa, here we come. Keep buying those gold slabs from there. So I've been in gold, and it was really funny. One of the reporters called me up and said, Professor, I just have questions about your gold holdings. And I said, okay, let me stop you right there. I have 9 gold coins, or is it 7? I don't know. There are no holdings. Please don't publish that in the papers. Langdana has no holdings. So nevertheless, 9 coins. And I'm buying lunch when I see you guys next. Oh, there's some more here? Okay, no, okay. Any other questions, folks? Oh, there are 5 more. Well, guys, deficit GDP ratio. Let's see what's down here. How cryptocurrency relates to macroeconomic equilibrium. What is MNG? I'm sorry. Did I cover that today? Cryptocurrency, you know what? That's the currency that you are talking to the wrong person. It's got no parents. The reason that we have dollar, green pieces of paper, on in Singapore, by the way, safe haven, orange pieces of paper. And may I point out that China was actually a safe haven in the last crisis, by the way. China actually was attracting hot capital when everything was friendly and the world was good. And India at one point was attracting hot capital, safe haven. But you know, these countries, the safe havenness lies in the institutions of these countries. And typically safe haven countries, especially large ones, can handle exogenous supply shocks better. So it's in there when you hold that green piece of paper or orange green piece of paper. But cryptocurrency, you have anonymity. You're totally unidentifiable. So those are benefits that you have, but there is no legacy. There's no link to a safe havenness. The continuous ledgering is amazing. And that can be used. It's being used in healthcare. It's being used. So the continuous ledgering part of it is really cool. The currency part of it, I'm just not gone there. I'm not going there. It's just something about it bothers me. It's the best I can do. Do you see anything competing with the dollar? No. So you have to understand this. 65%, this is very important, folks, and this is probably my last comment. 65% of all the money China has made, it used to be 75%. So when Deng Xiaoping cracked open the door in 1979, and keep in mind, the early leadership in China was enlightened. And when I say this in India, all my Indians get upset because we are not doing well, India and China right now. They're like, Langdana, whose side are you on? I'm going, I'm on nobody's side. You know, 65% of all the money China has made is in US dollars. So if you were to follow the money, you know that the guys who run China's macro shop and the guys who run the US macro shop are essentially not going to let the dollar collapse. Certainly not the Chinese, because that's their savings. That's 65% of all the money they've made since 1979. Also, don't forget, China is a monster powerhouse in manufacturing. Politics aside, okay? I'm just thinking macro now. I'm not talking about Hong Kong and all the issues and all the problems, just doing macro. China is a superpower in manufacturing. China last year, I haven't seen the recent numbers, but 2019 had 28% of the world's manufacturing. China was greater than in manufacturing percentage. US, Japan, and Germany combined. So when people say, oh yeah, China's gone, oh, supply chains are gone, I'm going, getting rid of TikTok and getting TikTok out of your country and WeChat, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. That's a political stunt. The manufacturing supply chains are huge. Yes, Apple is moving some jobs, but 28% of the world's manufacturing, more than the total of US, Japan, and Germany put together. And those supply chains are formidable. So global trade will happen. You'll be nibble around the edges where it makes sense to go to Canada or Mexico, keep the supply chains closer, but it's not going away. We're just going to nibble around the edges. Singapore is going to leverage its safe haven, become an innovation powerhouse, become a corporate headquarters par excellence, become an education powerhouse. There's enough room in the north for another 15 universities where students from the rest of the world who may be afraid to come to the US now might move their kids to Singapore. My classmates from engineering school, their kids are all going to Singapore. More comfortable there, you know? And so, and she-nomics, to me, there's a lot of sense to it. I'm hopeful. And I'm also hopeful here for this country. You know, as Winston Churchill said, America tries everything once and then finally gets it right. So let's hope for that. So thank you so much for being here. And again, email me anytime with any questions and go to my blog site. The blog page has got a great thing on modern monetary theory, great thing on oil. There's a great video blog on soft landing, overheating. Some of those questions clearly answered in there, so poke around in there. And again, may your C bar and I bar always be high. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Farooq. There are actually 2 more questions in the Q&A section.
Yes, okay, well, let's see.
What to answer is by Brian and Casey.
Oh, sure. Families used to be very happy with a single income. American capitalism, can anyone read, everyone can read these questions, right, Wendy, or should I read them out? Okay, you're muted.
You should read them out.
Okay, so American capitalism has necessitated dual incomes. Why do we think it is better to get both parents back? Casey, you should be in our class last week. So why do we should both parents work? Instead of getting a low unemployment rate by reducing the number of people looking for work. You know what? Casey, this has been a perennial and eternal question. So in the US, back in the day, one person worked. Grandpa worked, Granny stayed at home and did her thing. Then came the 80s and women burst into the workforce. And after that, essentially, it's been husband and wife or both working. Because, and this controversy is, well, what happened to real wages? Why are they both working? Well, what happened is the demands increased. The quality of life went up. Couples, families started demanding larger houses. The houses are much larger than what Granny and Grandpa lived in. The kids, look at the kids have their own rooms, individual rooms. But replete with electronics. Not so when you were growing up, when I was growing up, you know? And so you're demanding more. You got two-car, three-car garages. You got several vehicles. And in Singapore, well, you know what that means, you know? And so we demand more. Well, we better go and both of us schlep out there and work. So it's a huge hot potato whether the standard of living has gone up or down. If you were the top economic advisor to the President of the United States, what would you tell him to do? Resign right now. No, seriously. Seriously, you left me an open goal, Brian. I had to hit the ball in. So, seriously, I would tell him that it's a big planet, and I would tell him that a rising tide, and I sent the email to China and Singapore, I would tell him a rising tide lifts all boats. And in international trade, as I've taught in the past, both countries, all countries get better off. What happened here with this globalization is that till 2015, we went on rampant globalization and we overdid it. There's a great blog 4 or 5 pages ago from 2016 called Angry Americans. Read that. That got me a lot of attention, a lot. So I pointed out some years ago that we are outsourcing too much. We are sending stuff overseas we shouldn't have. We are getting people who are going, you know, my limo driver driving me to the airport was like, I told you the story. Professor, I'm a 4 generations furniture manufacturing person in South Carolina. And now that furniture has been sent overseas and I'm driving a limo and doing 2 other jobs and still making less. And the stuff coming from overseas is horrible, he's telling me. You're a professor, explain to me. And I heard this over and over, we overdid it. And we got angry Americans, angry Indians, angry French, angry Brits, Brexit, angry, and Japan, all over. And after 2015, the whole magic of globalization started to wane. And we started going parochial. We started moving inwards. Nationalism, protectionism is the order of the day today. And so I would try and convince the president that trade still works, but you know what? He has to check the box. Tough on China, check the box. There's not much you can do. You know, you can't get wine from a bottle of beer. There's not that much I can do. Archie, cheers. Stay healthy and positive. See bar up, Archie. Trust me on that. Let's see, what else do I have? Okay, have I answered all the questions, Wendy?
Yes, you have. Thank you, Dr. Langdana, and thank you everyone for attending this session with us today. Look out on our website for more sessions like this. We'll definitely hold more virtual sessions by our professors until they are able to come to Singapore in person. Okay, so have a good night. Thank you all.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you,
Thank
Laura. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Good luck.